So again, thank you very much for being here. We're just going to run through sort of the presentation that we did a few weeks back with your selection committee. So as we noted, Willow Valley Brunswick Architects, we've done lots of schools. In fact, we've done many, many schools in New Hampshire. We're very familiar with the New Hampshire schools, and our office is in Manchester. Between the three of us and the team that we have, we've done 16 middle schools. So we have lots of middle school experience to share with everybody. And I'll let Ann talk a little bit about the community.
So we understand that.
Yeah, you're talking to the mic.
Pardon me, sorry about that.
Yeah.
So we understand that you're actually three communities, three separate and distinct towns, and we want you to know that we will be approaching every single town, not just one, but all three. And we have a really defined process of doing that, the process of community engagement. And it really begins with listening. And this happens in many different capacities. We can do this with presentations to a broad audience. We can do this with one-on-one interviews. We can also do this with really focused workshops. The idea is to hear from as many people as possible. And from there, we start our planning. And that's when we really start to engage with the school administrators, teachers, really key people that are identified by Dr. Morse and you all. And we start to talk about educational planning and visioning. And then lastly, once we've gathered all that data and we've come up with some ideas, we come back to the community and we share all of that. And from there, once we have developed our vision, it's really all about spreading it to the town, getting the word out and getting the vote to yes. So there's many different ways, especially these days, of doing that. It could be things like mailers and brochures, perhaps invitations to very select community members that you think would love to hear from us, or it could be using social media. Facebook's a very powerful tool. So are videos. In recent history, we've found that some of the most powerful voices on this matter is not actually our own. It's of the students and the teachers giving testimonials about the things that they are looking forward to most in the space. So that's the process that we'll be engaging with the community. But there's also a process we'll be engaging with the Joint Building Committee. And that really can be broken down into 7 distinct steps. The first is the kickoff. And this is when we basically define the points of contact, the schedule, regular meetings, and then we move into analysis. And what that means is we get an understanding of what you have, what you like and what you don't like, and where you want to go. What do you want out of your school? And from there, we develop a vision. And by vision, I mean defining what your mission as a school is and what your philosophies really are. Because after we've done that, we move more into spatial arrangements, and this is programming. This is when we take square footages and architectural spatial reasoning and we define them per your vision. Basically, the building that we design can and should and will support all of your educational ideas. And then after that, we start designing. This is when we take all of your ideas and all the programming and the square footage we've designed for this process, and we start to come up with different iterations. Remember, there's never one solution to a problem, and so we'll come up with a few, and we'll put together floor plans, renderings, data, diagrams, and we'll show them all to you in an organized way and discuss them all. And we'll hear from you guys what it is that you want to see. And once we've done that, we refine based on this conversation, and then it's the rollout, which is what I had discussed in the previous slide. And Ron's going to talk about sustainability.
Thanks. So we understand that sustainability is very important within all 3 towns, and we definitely have a process when it comes to sustainability. As you see here, there are many facets and moving parts when it comes to sustainability. We take a very holistic approach. So it's not just one thing. We start with the very simple things to drive down the energy loads of the building, and then we start adding in all the sustainable aspects of how efficient is efficient. What are your goals? What are your vision? And we start to define that. It's all about return on investment. I think our philosophy is probably in line with your philosophy. How do we get schools to live and breathe and become environments on their own? And what is that value that you're getting in your return on investment? So as everybody knows, when you design energy efficient buildings, you are putting more into the building to save a lot over time. And so as you see here, what are those, what is that balancing, if you will, of the investment you're putting in and then the return you're getting over the lifetime of the building. Buildings last 50 to 100 years, so that is very important to see what value you get through that sustainability.
So it's all well and good to talk about sustainability and the mission and the design, but it needs to be practiced. We need to take everything that you want, and we have to make sure that there is quality assurance within the process. And what that means is once we move into schematic design and we go all the way through design documents and construction documents, we need to make sure that we are fulfilling that mission. And to do that, one of our biggest tools is Revit. Revit is a program that it's not like maybe some of you already know, but for those of you that don't, it's not a program where we draw 2D lines. We're modeling walls. And the power behind that means that as a designer, we can test some of our ideas. And as your architect, we can show you what we're doing. We can show you renderings, we can show you fly-throughs, and we can also, and this is probably one of the most helpful things, is coordinate with our consultants, because they also use Revit. And so we can see the structural beams, and we can see the pipes for the sprinkler system, and we can identify areas where they may or may not clash. And we can basically start to problem solve before we even break ground. And we think it's best if we can get to a point where we've answered all of your questions before we've even gotten into construction, and Revit helps us do that.
Thanks. Well, we designed the whole building inside and out, and one of the good things about LaValle Brenzinger is that we have a really solid interior design team in the office, and they really know materials and they know how they are sustainable and things like that. So on this particular slide, the idea is we tend to choose, and if your facilities person is here, we tend to choose materials that are very durable, because nothing's more sustainable than something that lasts for a long, long time and is easy to maintain. And there is something about sustainability with materials as well. For example, carpet. We can get carpet that doesn't off-gas as much, or we can buy other materials that are made out of recycled products or something like that. And in general, we tend to do interiors that are very flexible. You have a wonderful arrangement here. I'm sure it moves over and you do something else. We think about that in all of our different spaces, because again, nothing is more sustainable than building one space and using it many different ways. And then all of those things work with the whole environment of the place. We're working with middle school students here. We'll talk a little bit more about that, but middle school students are in a, let's say, we're going to say the word awkward sometimes. They're in an awkward stage of development, kids to adults. And sometimes it's important to engage students and to give them an environment with light and with colors and, a place to keep them like really focused on what is going on in the environment. And one way to do that is we use the fancy word transparency. I think it means glass. But the whole idea here is that if you can see what other kids are doing without being distracted, you can learn what's coming up next. And the fancy term for that is visible learning. But that's really important, because then everybody's engaged in the community and it's kind of like a big family all learning from one another. And those are some of the interior things that we employ. You?
Yeah, so we were very pleased to see that education is the catalyst for this project. Everything that we do is around the learning environment. We want to make sure that everybody knows that we're not designing to be architects. What we're really doing is designing a learning environment. And in fact, our philosophy is to do a robust educational planning process and add that to sustainability, because education has to sustain itself too as it evolves over time. And then we multiply that by your community, and if we do that right, this school will be the Oyster River Middle School that really reflects all of the community, all of the education, all of your sustainability goals, and that's how we measure success. middle schools, as Lee just talked about, it's a time for change. Your fifth grade is transitioning from elementary students. They're heading into middle school. They want to be adults. The maturity levels are all different. And so we know that. And so middle schools really do become a special place in a child's education.
So one thing to think about when you're, for any child, but middle schools in particular, is to design spaces that are welcoming, that are safe, but they don't feel like they're enclosed, or like we like to say, they don't feel like a prison. They really are open and wonderful schools. And we have, security consultants who help us with that. And they should be warm and inviting and part of the community.
Middle schools are lots of teams. And so really what we're doing is building small communities. We're building little communities of education taking place within a holistic school. And so the important thing is to be able to have that team work individually, have that team work with multiple teachers, but at the same time they feel like they're part of a village or part of an entire family. So these small communities that we build throughout the school are very important, we believe, when we're talking about middle schools.
Especially when you're dealing with 700 kids in the same place, you really want to break them down into reasonable, smaller neighborhoods or something like that. When we speak to your faculty, we're expecting that they'll want flexible and adaptable classrooms that are, integrated with technology. And as you can see from this picture or imagine, the idea that you can have somebody off to the side with individualized learning, which you probably hear a lot about, or you can support the idea of your special education classes being inclusive in the classroom as much as possible, which is a very important thing these days. And if the classroom is big and very, very flexible, you can do those things.
We've all heard of STEAM and STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math. We're coupling that with the arts, and you get some really great spaces. And these spaces allow students to work with proficiency-based learning, project-based learning. It allows them exploratory learning, and really it's an environment where they're making things. And so if you're familiar with the maker movement that started in California about 10 years ago, maker spaces now have really become a place where heads-on and hands-on activities take place, and students are able to build portfolios in spaces like this.
And all of you are part of your community. I'm sure you probably represent some of the different towns and different areas. We understand any middle school to be part of the community use. So if we can design some spaces that can be used on the weekends, after school, by everybody, they're flexible, they're open, they're day-lit, spaces like this, then we can help you have indoor and outdoor spaces that you can all use, and you can talk to your community about that and how this benefits everybody.
So throughout this process, we did a very quick analysis of what we thought your site is, your existing site, if you will. And so we came up with just a couple of examples, a couple of ideas of how a new middle school might be able to fit on your existing middle school site.
To you.
Mm-hmm. So we have two ideas. One we just showed you, but basically they're both the same in that if we build this behind the school and if we organize this in a certain way, we're able to get a multi-story middle school that's going to allow us to then tear down most of your existing middle school. We may want to take a look at the gym, for instance, as a rec center, and really maximize the amount of space that you have for fields, outdoor learning spaces, pathways, parking, and really take a look at how this building interacts with the existing site and also connects to the high school, because there's obviously going to be a visual connection from up on the hill looking down. And so it's really an opportunity to take a look at that.
Mm-hmm. Every site is different and every building is different, so it will take form based on your own place and your own needs.
So when we get all this done, things that we like to present, so at the end of all this, for instance, when we're going to the public and asking them for their investment in this project, we can put together for you walkthrough videos, if you will, that allow the community to really understand what they're getting in this building. As they walk through the building and as they see this, we can have commentary that talks about the sustainable attributes, the educational benefits. I think what Ann talked about is even if we get the voices of the teachers, the staff, and especially the students in the background of a video like this, and people can really see it, they get a real understanding for how the environment is going to change from what you have now, from what it could be for the future.
In real life, you have to open doors to go through them, but in this video, you don't.
It's nice.
Which is kind of cool.
And this is a representative example. You know, we have all sorts of different projects that we do. And so obviously, to this quality, we really want to make sure that when they see this, it really talks about middle school. What you're looking at here is a synergy project. So, and this is the Revit. This is exactly what Ann was talking about. As we're designing these buildings, we're actually building them in virtual reality. The importance to that is most of our clients, when they walk in our building during construction, or when they walk in the building, their building, I should say, during, when it's done, they say, we've been here before. We've seen this. It's great that we now get to use it. Then I'll let Andre introduce you to Bowen.
Good evening. So Bowen Corporation is very, very pleased to be part of the team here. We've had the privilege of working with Ron and his group on a number of projects, as well as having completed 4 projects for the school district over the past few years. So as we move forward, where our role is in all of this is to help develop a budget that works for the school district. Construction management is our favorite way of doing business because it's an open book, full of trust type of relationship. There are no secrets. All of our numbers are shared at all points of the project, and it just generates a really warm and long-lasting relationship with clients. So we've practiced that since our inception back in 1991. That's by far our preferred way of doing things. So we each have kind of a role in this. You know, it begins with the owner, who provides expectations, program information, and financing guidelines for us. And they will make informed decisions based on our feedback and the architect's feedback on numbers and design and these type of things. The architect's role in the CM process is to guide you in planning and design the project, providing final plans and specifications. And our job is to watch the bottom line, to continue to provide good costing information, advice to the architects on what's the most efficient way to construct something, provide schedules for how quickly we can accomplish things. And on site, our job is always to make sure quality is met at all times. So in the beginning, and we will show you our first kind of go-around on the budget process in a few minutes. But our first project is to develop an initial budget. And what that is kind of a sounding board. It's a tool for you to look at and make decisions. You know, is this too much for us to sell to the voters? Or are we comfortable with it? What's included? So we've started the process of getting feedback from Dr. Morse and Jay and other people, so that we have kind of an idea of what options we need to look at for you. And we'll show you that first iteration shortly. Some of our jobs is also to develop a guaranteed maximum price as quickly as possible, so you can go out to the voters and get that approved. We will accomplish this before final plans are completed, based on our experience, the advice of Ron and his crew on what's coming, and we feel very confident we'll be able to get you a good number in time for your bond votes. Then along the way, I will be involved in the project from our office, and we'll have a staff on site, a full-time superintendent, as well as some assistants to to make sure at all times that everyone's performing the way they should be. It's our job to make sure everything gets put in the right way and be built to specs. So we've started to develop a schedule of events that have to happen in the upcoming months and year. The tentative goal is to get you folks ready for a bond vote in 220 if you go a certain path, and if not, it might be a little longer, but that's kind of the end of the road here. But you'll see everyone will be presented with a schedule such as this and get to follow along with what has to happen at certain milestones along the way.
So what you see here is something that our team and Andre have been working on in terms of what we called option B. And option B, a lot of times with these public projects, once the vote passes in March of 2020, the big question is, well, when do we start construction? And so what we've done, and obviously we don't expect you to be able to read this, we just wanted to demonstrate that there's a couple of milestones, and those are the red balloons that you see. So the first milestone is to finish all of our educational planning process, the community engagement, meet with a lot of participants in this process, and come up with a concept design by this coming March of 2019. And we've promised Dr. Morse that we would have a concept and maybe even an exterior view. But that exterior view will just be developing the character. In other words, what is important about what this building looks like to the community and how it really fits into the fabric of the communities. That's our goal for the first balloon that you see. We would then work between the two red balloons until we get to the vote of March of 2020. By the time we get to the vote of March 2020, we want to work very closely with Andre so that he has bids in hand for the site work, for the foundations and the steel. The beauty of CM at Risk is that you're able to fast track a project. And so that means right after the vote passes, you're able to actually start construction. The benefit of that is time, and time is money. Traditionally, for folks who say, let's get the vote passed and then finish the design and engineering, you're almost waiting a year before you start construction. And so we've done this many times with Andre in his company, and so we'd like to, or even just talk about the possibility of doing it again. And what this means is that once we start construction and we then develop the documents and bid the whole rest of the job in July of 2020, that means that you have the opportunity to actually move into your school when folks come back from winter break in 2022. And that usually means a lot to a lot of parents who are going to be supporting this and who they want their children to actually be able to participate in the school and enjoy the school and experience the school that they've voted for. So this is just an example of timeline that we've put together, and we can continue to talk about these timelines as we go forward. So I don't know if Andre wants to talk about the budget, but we've also looked at basically three options, and we understand that the Goss Road property is a viable option. And so, not trying to sound presumptuous, but what we did is we went out there and actually visited the site and walked the site. Dr. Morse has been talking to the owner, and Andre has put together a scenario of sort of a what-if scenario. And the what-if scenario is, what would this project look like if we built it on the existing property versus we build it on the Goss property? And then we also wanted to take a real look at an addition and renovation project. And so together with our experience, we're able to sort of define what those things might look like. You want to talk a little bit more about that?
So we started with the easiest one, was to build a new school on the existing site. We feel that barring some type of horrible subsurface material, that would be the simplest approach. In talking with educators, there's a feeling that perhaps being on campus would be the best option, but that's where we started. So that we looked at that, and working with Ron and developing a drawing schedule, because I can tell you many things, but if Ron says I can't do the drawings in that period of time, I won't be a success with my construction. So Ron has been very helpful to give us guidance on what he feels his company can produce in drawings, and he talked a little bit about trying to fast-track the project. But the first scenario has us starting after bond vote approval in 2020, and being able to turn the school to this faculty sometime, let's say, during February break. We've spoken to the head of facilities, Jim Rizicki, and he had some ideas about, in a 2-week period, he would be able to make the move into the new facility. So we looked at potential costs, and please make sure you understand that this is a no feedback estimate. In other words, we looked at school projects that we've completed in the past. Ron was very helpful as well. Ann has a good history of other projects they've worked on, so between all of our databases, we came up with a starting point with numbers. And that's where we've begun. But it has to get a lot of feedback from this point forward. We've looked at taking down most of the existing school in this example, which is the demolition cost. We have kind of a standard site work budget, would allow us to build a turf field on site. We're looking at potentially a geothermal system for heat. So we have the cost of drilling wells in the site work and general budget. There's no land purchase cost needed, obviously. Not really any infrastructure costs as far as outside access drives. And we have a construction contingency in there, our CM fee at the bottom, and a budget for that all in, for construction is $40,599,774. And then if we just quickly skip forward.
40 million.
Yeah, 40 million. And then we add additional soft cost permits and fees, owner consultants, A&E fees, and furniture and equipment. It gets us to a budget of $46,077,684. And that's complete. And that's with projections for a construction start of 2020.
So I think one of the things that we wanted to point out is so the Goss site, obviously being a greenfield, if you will, without the logistics of building the building in close proximity to the school, it does have a couple of things we need to talk about. One is the amount of infrastructure to bring from either Route 4, no matter where we access it, sort of into that site, and those costs were reviewed. And I'll just go back so Andre can talk a little bit more about that. But we believe it also adds 1 year to the project. And the reason for that is obviously site acquisition. We have to do a due diligence in terms of negotiating, obviously, the sale, and we wouldn't be doing that, but you as the school board would be doing that. We'd have to get up-to-date surveys. There'd be subdivisions that need to get done, wetland analysis and flagging, and so forth. So the permitting process is just a little bit more involved. It's not a big deal, but it is a little bit more involved. And given that we're already into the fall, doing a lot of those wetland flaggings, which need to be done in the spring, looking for vernal pools, looking for habitats and things like that need to take place. And so that could only start basically in the spring of this year. And so that was just one of the things we looked at, and you can talk a little bit more about the cost.
So we felt that the basic cost of the building would not change whether it was on site A or site B. However, because it couldn't start for a whole nother year, we had to apply a 4% inflation factor because everything seems to be in that range every year. There were some added general condition costs because now instead of having a compact site that you can easily supervise with the staff we had planned, you now have to dedicate someone just to making sure all the site work gets completed. I'm sorry. There's going to be things like access from Route 4 that has to be negotiated with the state, and some type of a breakdown lane has to be put in there. There's probably a quarter a mile of driveway that has to be put in. And so there's a lot more site work involved, and it's going to take a little bit more supervision. Land purchase costs, we looked at what the property is appraised and assessed at, and came up with a guesstimate of $1 million. We haven't had a reply from the owner yet, so we don't know how accurate that is, but it's just a placeholder for the moment. The 1.7 million is what we feel is going to be potentially the cost of the infrastructure, the access drives, different breakdown lanes, bringing utilities onto the site, because it is a ways from current utilities. So there's a cost that's associated with that. Again, a construction contingency, because of the amount of site work involved, the greatest contingency is always in the ground, so we feel it should be a little higher there. And so a beginning estimate for that particular selection is in the $45 million range for construction costs. And if you can pop over to the second page, a little bit more cost in permitting and fees because of the site work involved. And so we're up to $48 million. You'll notice that we've put in a figure of $1.8 million for the sale of the existing middle school. Again, it's presumption that you might want to do that. It's also presumption that somebody wants to buy it. But that's in there as a consideration.
So when we talk about addition and renovation, one of the things that Andre and I were talking about, and we toured the school and we walked through the school, and thank you to Jay for walking us through, with all the different levels that go on there, and the fact that we don't want to spend a lot of money on temporary facilities, because when you spend money on like temporary classrooms for 2 years, you're just throwing that money away, only because you don't get any return on that. So one of the measures that we would recommend, which has been successful in the past, is to actually build a portion of the new building first. You then move the students from a portion of your existing building into the new building, and then you either demolish or renovate that space, and then move again. And so what you end up with, invariably, right, wrong, or indifferent, is we find you end up building more space for the same amount of educational space, especially when you have ramps and stairs that have to negotiate all the different levels when you're tying in to a new building. So for that reason, you'll see that we have on this sheet, basically we're thinking about 136,600 square feet, and that would include the middle school and recital hall combined. And if we did that in an addition and renovation, you can see we're up over 150,000 square feet. And the only reason for that is when we're tagging on to existing buildings, there's an efficiency that's lost. And I think you've witnessed this over the years as you've added on to the school. It becomes bigger, but it also becomes a lot more sprawled out. So you don't get that efficiencies of organization, and really what it comes down to is spatial efficiency that gets lost.
So in trying to look at our projects, such as Ron's describing, the first factor is time. All efficiencies are lost when you're adding on and starting to move and renovate different areas. So we're calculating it's going to add a year onto the construction process if we choose this route. So if you see at the top, we have 109 weeks as kind of our baseline for the other two projects, and this one's at 156 weeks. And it's mostly because we can't build everything at once. We have to build some, move students, build another section, move some more students, and et cetera, et cetera. Unfortunately, the school has been there a long time, and it's very difficult to put together an estimate on something like this. Ron was very helpful in saying, look, we want the spaces to seem new when we're done. So what are we keeping from the existing school? It's not well insulated. as we toured the classrooms, there's CalWall for windows, there's glass windows that in some rooms, 75% of it, the seals have failed. So you're talking about replacing a lot of windows, adding insulation to your roof, adding insulation to your walls. It goes on and on. So as we start to put some numbers to this and look at how much has to be renovated, the cost is darn close to building new for the renovated spaces. You can see that there's a huge add in general conditions because we're adding a whole nother year to the process. You know, the job site office, there's all the supervisors and things like that. So looking at the top, there's a much higher estimate for the school. There's the added general condition. The demolition costs, instead of having a company come in and raise the whole building all at once, now they've got to come in and break up smaller pieces of it. So that costs more. The site work budget, you'll notice, is lower. And the main reason for that is that, in all likelihood, we are going to lose our ability to have a playing field because we're going to have to expand into areas where the playing field would go with the new addition. So in the other plans, we're scheduled to put in a nice turf field similar to what's up at the high school, which will give a lot of use. But again, we're not 100% sure yet, but we think we're going to lose that ability by adding addition on the property. Construction contingency is the highest of all three options because when you do renovations, who knows what you're going to find. So are we going to discover hazardous materials? We don't know. Are we going to find structural defects or structures that are no longer meeting code and the engineer's going to say, look, we have to beef these up? That's why we have to carry more contingency in this early phase. We'll go to page 2. From architect's perspective, we're going to ask them to be involved for a whole other year in construction administration. So there's costs associated with that, along with all of the fees for their consultants and things like that. So we feel as though that building has had a good run for the SAU, but it would be a real challenge and quite expensive to try to reuse it.
So with that, again, these are not numbers that are set in stone. These are based on historical data that we have from other projects. And we've made, obviously, some assumptions that we need to talk to you about further. And so what we've come up with is this as a starting point, a jumping off point, if you will. And so I guess we'll open it up. I know everybody has a lot of questions, so.
In all the schools you've built, have you incorporated it or allowed the schools to incorporate it into the curriculum as far as having them learn, what the process is of building, the sustainability, what goes into it?
Yep.
I mean, it may tweak someone to go into construction or architecture or something like that. So is that something you've done in the past, or?
We do, and in fact, one of the great things about if you do this on your existing site is the students will actually watch this building come together. We do spend time, especially at the middle school level, where their creativity is really sort of unmarred, if you will, from folks saying you can't do this, can't do that. We want their ideas. We want to talk to them about this entire process and engage them in sustainability talks. We do have a visioning session coming up where we want to talk to them about their day in the life, and we want to talk to them about their visioning goals when it comes to sustainability. And the building itself, if we do it right, is really going to be the third teacher in the facility, because the student should be able to look at the facility and realize how things come together. It's almost like one of those books, How Things Work. And if we design the school to be a school, then the building itself should be teaching the students.
A school construction project is a wonderful opportunity. We lament all the time about how young people don't seem to be interested in the construction industry anymore. And it's really a fantastic way to make a living. And we relish the opportunity to present that to students. On all our school projects, we found that the most important thing is to parade every student through the construction site so that they see what's going on. One, it's interesting for them, and two, if they get to see it in a supervised manner, they're not so apt to go in there when they're not supposed to. So we found that technique works very well. There's tremendous opportunities, and we enjoy going into classrooms, giving them homework assignments, how to calculate concrete. It's an opportunity to show students, well, what's math really for? There's a gazillion things that make a construction project really, really interesting. And, you won't reach everybody, but a lot of students really seem to relate to the process and what we can show them. So we've worked with faculty in the past to create those type of opportunities, to invite them to come in, whether it's elementary school kids and having them come in and put their handprints on concrete or write their names on sheetrock that gets put up, and knowing that 20 years from now when they come back to the school, hey, my name's behind this wall. Lots of really neat ideas out there to get kids excited about what's happening in front of their eyes. And there's one other thing that I absolutely have to say is the thing that worries me most about trying to expand the existing school is safety. We're going to make people miserable for 3 years because we're going to be right there making noise and dust and all the things, and distracting because we're literally going to be next door. With a new building, there's some space, so to speak, so it's easy to come to the new learning facility on an adventure and an educational experience. But if we're right there, bless you. Bless you. Sorry. It would be a real challenge not to become disruptive and to create dangerous situations.
Another aspect of that is,
You need to use the
I think you're going to have to use the mic.
Come right up.
And Andre, maybe you might have to talk into the mic a little
that's
more.
okay.
too.
Another aspect of that in terms of just education, I don't know if any of you are teachers, is the disruption to your programs. Because every time you move people or you have them do something different, you have to shut things down and you have a class, but it's every few months or so. And that's a really big thing to think about. Disruptions to programs makes teachers very stressful, makes the children feel that stress, and then it goes back to the parents, which means you. But anyway, it's something to really think about.
Denise?
So I'm just interested in finding out more about how or the process to determine if in fact you can build on, new on the existing site. I know I was talking to one of the former school board members who was around when the middle school was renovated the last time, and huge problem, they discovered ledge, and that's kind of why the gym is where it is. That gym was never supposed to be there. It was a result of the project getting too expensive, and they couldn't put the gym where they wanted to put it because they had to save costs. So just kind of wondering about the whole process if we did decide to build new on the existing site, and how you would be able to determine that that is in fact going to work.
So the first thing we do before we spend any time or money designing on the existing site is to get it surveyed, and the site survey is taking place now. And once we come up with a bit of a concept design, and it's really not even a concept design because we sort of know where the building would go, because we obviously want to allow the existing to remain in operation, we will go out and drill some borings. So what we do is we explore the earth right there, and we find out how deep is the ledge, for instance. You know, the bad thing about ledge is it's ledge, but the good thing about ledge is it's ledge. So if we're talking about geothermal systems, you're going to get much better earth coupling and the thermodynamics of ledge than having to fill it with grout, right? All of those wells. If the ledge is really robust and solid, we pin foundations to them. You know, you don't necessarily have to dig these out. So there are ways to work with ledge, just like there are ways to work with unsuitable soils with geopiers and things like that. So I think you're right. I think the first thing you do is your due diligence to say, is it even possible to do what we're doing? And I know we just painted sort of a bleak picture about additions and renovations occupied, but we do them all the time. It's just we have to be very careful on how we do that. And it's the same careful approach that we take when we investigate a site. We don't want to waste money. You know, we want to do the biggest bang for the buck.
I had a question about, we talked about this, I think, in some of our earlier meetings. I would have an interest, and I think this may be incorporated in the design, of having a first-class performance space with, you know, not just a cafetorium, which is kind of similar to what you might have at Mast Way, you know, where you have a, kind of a gymnasium in a performing space, and it's not really a really good performing space. But so something first class where you could have a performing space in the middle school, and just your ideas of how you've done that or how you might do that at a new school.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So the first thing is we know it's a music program that we're really focusing on. So the first thing is to really meet with the program leaders themselves and to meet with the students and find out how are they going to use the space, what are they looking for, and schedule-wise, when do they use it. So our experience has been we can build a standalone recital hall, for instance, for music and chorus. That can be standalone connected to the building. So just like a science lab would be in the building, you'd have the recital hall. Another way to do it is to have that be more of an intimate space that during performances can actually open up into the heart of the school, if you will. And so you can take a space that has so many fixed seats and then open up a wall, for instance, which is an acoustic wall, so it's completely separated during practices and things like that. But during performances, that wall opens up and really engages the rest of the school, so you can fit 1,000 people in there. So there are a couple of different ways to look at how a recital hall like that becomes not only your performance space, but also your educational space, and it doesn't sit empty while school is taking place, or while practices are taking place, or while performances are not going on. Now, having said that, there is something else to say about having a space that is completely Class A, like you said, acoustically treated. It's all performance designed. And so when you start opening things up, they become a little less, but at the same time, they perform very well. And so we can share all of that information with you about the pros and cons of having a recital hall that seats, say 1,000 people versus one that seats 300 but opens up into area that can fit another 700.
Kenny?
And thank you for all the time. So one of our dilemmas, and probably one of the more upfront dilemmas, is really going to be making that decision. I think we've really discounted renovation. I don't think that's really anything that we're going for. But it's building on-site or building off-site. And we've seen from you the difference in construction costs, which certainly is significant. Also heard about the value of the education for students watching a building go up. My bias is I love a school that kids could walk to, could bike to. But outside of the numbers and outside of what I said about the biking and the education, we know that our site is compact and perhaps the off-site has more room. Is there anything you can tell us about what we might be able to get from off-site that we can't get on-site because there's more room?
Well, I think the benefit is there's more room. So if you wanted to expand parking beyond a certain amount, you have the opportunity to do that. I think off-site, you are getting sort of out of the town center. if you will, so it is a little bit more remote. So we also have to take into consideration the busing and the travel time. You will have more room for fields. But we do a lot of urban schools, so if we were to put like a phys ed multipurpose field on a new site, we could also take a look at, let's say you had to spend $1 million on a new site. Is that $1 million worth putting a PE field on the roof, having a green roof, essentially? But I think the number one thing is more space that you're going to have in a building. We still have to do the same due diligence, how much is actually buildable land.
But do you think there's, I guess, two areas that I could see being a focus? One, is the educational environment better by building on a place with more space? And then also you talked, and I think you read our community, right? There's an interest in energy efficiencies and what we can do. And I saw that your plan had a garden and things. Is that something that could be really different one place than the other and make it more compelling to be off-site?
I think it'll be different because it'll have different constraints, if you will. But I think if we do it right, there shouldn't be any difference between what we do off-site and what we're able to do on-site. It's just how do we accomplish those goals. One thing that we like to do in the visioning piece of it is actually figure out what are those visions and what are those, what I call non-negotiables for the educational environment, whether inside or outside. And I think that doesn't change. So whether we go to a new site or whether we stay here on the existing site, we have to achieve those expectations.
A couple of the things that I thought of when you were asking that question were, we don't know so much about the green site. I'm sure environmentally, if you open it up and there are woods around and things like that to take advantage of, that's very powerful for learning. The site you have now, though, my understanding is that one of the best things about it is there's the high school, and then there's the middle school, and the power for education of the ability to share programs for kids to grow, to go back and forth. If we do a recital hall here, well, guess what? And then sometimes the middle schoolers go to the high school to use that space, and then the high schoolers might come over and use that space. The proximity is really of value. And when we did draw things like gardens and all of that, we have plenty of space on the existing site to orient the building properly to the sun. But you also have the wetland, which may not exist, right, in a little while, where we've heard back and forth to a couple things.
Less wet today than it was last year.
Right, it's just as wet, but that's always, it can be a benefit, but you have conservation land right there. And what we were suggesting was that, and I'm sure that all of your teachers, especially science, and they want to take advantage of that, but they don't really have the impetus to do that. So if you build on the new site, there was an understanding. I read your notes earlier on before we even got into this. And there was a lot of talk about slowly moving the other buildings over the years, the high school, elementary, over to a larger site. Is that still something you're thinking of? That could take a really long time to get those benefits of proximity, community, and sharing of those important spaces. I think especially of things like your programs that have to do with maker spaces and innovation, and how the middle school and the high school could really work with one another to make those programs more functional. How's that?
So, I mean, as you see, there's two parts to the question, right? So one is, can you achieve your goals on both sites? The other one is almost like a pros and cons list, which Lee is going through. And that's a pretty important list, because you have a lot of benefit on the existing site. So,
Thank you for that answer. That was
So
very helpful.
my question really, since you brought up safety, one of the many problems of the currently existing school, and I think it'd be very difficult to change with the ad reno, is the traffic pattern. And if you look at it, what happens in both the morning and the afternoon, traffic backs up along Baghdad, and then on both sides of Madbury Road, it strings out. So you get this insane crisscross of driving and walkers, and it's really bad. I can't quite see if you kept the existing footprint, how you change that. The real question is if you go new on site, how would you be able to change that to a more humane, or safer mechanism? And I say that because you even at the high school itself, if you come in the afternoon and look at the high school, a similar thing occurs. You back up Co onto Baghdad as well on both sides. So is there a mechanism to make it better, or is there a way to change it in drop-off or other measures to make it so it's safer?
Right. And I think the answer is definitely. If we just, quickly go back to sort of a site plan. The interesting thing about sort of removing the existing school really opens up, you basically get a very large front yard, if you will. And it opens up lots of possibilities, not only for how Co Drive, how the property will front itself on Co Drive, but also Denison. And then how it actually, now Garrison, even though it's a one-way going in the opposite direction, really creates a view corridor. So there's a lot of input that needs to go into this, though. We would like to do a traffic study. We would like to figure out with landscape architects and civil engineers exactly the best way to approach this from a vehicular movement point of view, as well as pedestrian point of view. So as Ann was explaining the other day when we were talking about this, you don't want the kids crossing the street, meaning going in front of the parents or going in front of the buses. So how do you separate those two? And so there is a lot more opportunity, and we don't have an answer for you. And it's kind of silly for us to, I know we drew this here, but, to think that we've got sort of a solution to this without really talking to everybody and figuring out, counting cars, how many people do queue right now, what time the buses do come, right, and they queue twice, actually, so we've come out and we've done some observations. So you have the first queue when students leave, and then you have the queue when after-school programs let out. Yeah. And so, I just think that it's important for us not to get into any solution, but to say that
You recognize it's a problem.
we recognize the problem, and removing the existing building is going to help exponentially in order to do that. And the nice thing about the ledge is your gym had to be put over there, and it's a really good spot now for solving the site with a new school. So, all good things come around,
I just wonder in terms of costing, that essentially if you go off-site, you're having like an all-car access to that school, because you couldn't have walkers, you couldn't have bikers. And would that, and this may be a question for Dr. Morris, would that increase the annual busing costs, and you're having sites that are at some distance? I mean, this may not be each year a big amount, but multiplied over the course of a school, of the core life of the building, it could be a significant cost.
It is, and it's a conversation that we had in the committee last year about the downside of off-site. The off-site offers all kinds of land, and it's beautiful land, but it also means that it's a remote site. There is very little residential area around the Goss Farm property, the Goss industrial property. And so basically it means that you would be moving more kids on buses, or parents would be moving more kids in cars. So it would increase the ridership on the buses, and in order to do that, we'd have to have more buses. So, overall, K through 12, we're probably at about 75%. It's very high at the elementary, gets less at the middle school, and then gets far less at the high school. So, you would increase your busing to move kids. You'd also increase your busing between the middle school and the high school programs.
When you talk about interviewing faculty and students around things like the music space, how big is the range of responses that you really get from project to project?
Well, you should come, because the middle school kids, you never know what they're going to say. And quite frankly, with teachers, you never know what they're going to say. And so we've had, and I was explaining this to somebody, that I was working on a project where a student said, we'd like a fireplace. And everybody thought, no, yeah, okay. So there is a fireplace in that building. And it has become the favorite spot of the students. It's become the favorite spot of the faculty. And the issue is we have clients who actually go visit some of our buildings. And so we had a client who went to visit that and said, well, where's our fireplace going to be? And then there's arguments as to whether it's going to be in the learning commons space, which is technically the library, or should it be somewhere sort of in, an academic area for them to sit. So you'd be surprised. I've actually had letters, or we've had letters written to us by students. We're doing a high school where one of the students basically wrote a dissertation on green roofs. Why they're important, how much they cost, what the benefit is, how they work over time, how more durable they are. I don't know if that's the right syntax to use, but, and so students really get engaged if we ask them to.
So Brian, could I just piggyback that? Jay's done a really marvelous job next week, Michael, of rotating students through the visioning exercise. And there's a whole group of kids who have prepared themselves for the opportunity to talk to Ron already. It's kind of cool, that the teachers and the students are already thinking, oh, he's coming, so we're going to get ready for him. So it's happening already.
So I was going to ask about what the agenda is for that exercise. I've talked to a couple of people who are invited, and there's a lot of confusion about exactly what to expect next week.
Okay. So next week, we're going to spend most of the first day in the morning talking about a day in their life. We want to know what they really like about their school, what is significant about their school. When students go out and talk to other students, what do they say about Oyster River? Because that's what kids do, right? Well, what's your school like? What's your school like? So we want to know what's very important to them. Then we're going to ask them if they had a magic wand, what would they change? And it's not so much that they don't like something, but what would they change for a better environment? And you'll be surprised. We're going to hear beanbag chairs. We're going to hear no tables and, no desks in the classroom, couches, we want to sit on the floor more. But I think the important thing is to really ask them that and get a picture for what it's like for a 5th grader, 6th, 7th, and 8th grader to come through the school. At the same time, we're going to ask the parents the same thing. And they're probably going to say they love queuing up in their cars. But we're going to ask the faculty the same thing, too. And so it really allows us to get a real picture for what is very significant about your school, because we don't want to lose the great things about your middle school. We want to carry that over into the new environment. But what we also want to do is we want to upgrade, right? We want to make things so much better, and we want to consider the future. And so that's the first day. We're going to end the first day talking about sustainability with the parents. What's their vision of sustainability? We've talked about everything from, yes, we want a highly efficient building, to a net zero energy building, to even a net positive energy building. And all of that is obviously possible. What's the investment up front, and what's the saving over time? We're then going to open up the next day in the morning with Jay and the students to talk about their ideas about sustainability. And hopefully the students will have similar comments, but their own comments about what they feel is sustainable. Everything from recycling programs to, I know, Jay, you have a group right now, right, in the school?
Sustainability Club, yep.
Yep, so the Sustainability Club is going to bombard us with what they think we should be doing. And it's all great stuff, because what then we want to do at the end of the day on Tuesday is, again, meet with the leaders and the educators and the parents to really talk to them about what's their vision of the new school. What is it really going to do in terms of the site that it's sitting on, in terms of the neighborhood, the character of the building, all of those parts and pieces, and then we synthesize those. So if all the students said something and all the parents happen to say the same thing, that's where we start talking about it's a non-negotiable. It has to be in the building. We're then going to take all of these answers and also ask, 7 or 8 questions. How will our school do this? And how will our school do that in the future? Well, we've just gained all this information. So we have a real good clue as to how this is going to be. And we're going to come back to Dr. Morris and the education leaders and sit down with them and say, did we get it right? And then go back to the community and the students and the parents and the educators and say, is this really what you want your school to do? And they're going to refine that. We're not going to get it 100% right. But it's going to obviously make them think about, geez, this is more than what we have now. And this is a great opportunity to really transform the way learning takes place at Oyster River into something that's going to last 50 years.
And then when are we going to hear kind of the result of that? When I look at the conceptual schedule that Jim gave us last week, there's nothing between that workshop and January.
Yep. So we'll be back in, no, I'm just kidding. So we'll set up a schedule because I think the important thing is to come back while it's still fresh in everybody's minds. And we're going to have flip charts and things like that. So we'll be writing a lot of things down. We take photographs and we'll send the photographs as meeting minutes. You know, we'll have meeting minutes, but we really want to capture what people write down. And we really want to capture what the thought was based on a certain subject. And we do that by tape recording things, by writing things down, and then coming back within a serious amount of time, meaning a week, 2 weeks, whenever we can get it on the schedule in terms of coming back and reporting back. And that process of reporting back and going back and forth starts next week, but it's going to continue through January. Because by the time January comes around, we're not going to be drawing anything on paper. We'll be diagramming some things about spatial relationships and sort of social relationships in the school, but we're not drawing anything until we get that part right. So sometime in the December, January timeframe is when we're going to end this long dialogue of what is it we should be doing.
Kenny?
This might be, I don't know, not doable or not right, but, and I love the idea, you know, that all the talking with the students, with the parents, and doing that, and I know there's a group that you'll be meeting with, I think it's a 3-day workshop that has some community representatives. But so much of our 3 towns, our district, are families that don't have kids in the school. And we have an incredibly involved citizenry who are very vocal and are very opinionated and really let us know when things are right and wrong. And really, so much of the passage of this is going to weigh on those people. Is there a way to broaden a little bit more that outreach? Because not only hearing what the kids want, the parents of kids in the school want, but maybe hearing from some of these, more than just the working group, that community, it might give more buy-in to a very important group of people for us to be able to see this through. And I think they have strong ideas, and maybe they would have things to add to that ultimate design.
No, it's
I just throw
definitely
that out.
doable. In fact, we would encourage it. So we're going to have our daily meetings with students because they're here during the day, but we'll have evening meetings in each town to really reach out to folks. What we like to do, and we've talked a little bit with Dr. Morris about this, is you have events that take place in the communities. We don't want to create a new event. People are busy these days. They got lots of things to do. So we want to piggyback on those events. So if you know that there's an event taking place in Madbury and everybody goes to it, you know, if it happens to be like a library program that they do on Halloween or anything like that, you know, we want to get there and we want to talk to people about the new middle school project that's coming up. What are your thoughts? And just like we have an agenda for the workshop, you know, we would have things to ask them and, you know, what are your thoughts and tell us about your vision. So I will tell you that at one school we have a walking track. And there's no high school kid that I know that walks on a walking track. But the reason we have a walking track in that school is because the population of those 2 towns that got together to build that school, most of them were seniors. Most of them were empty nesters, if you will. And their question was, what's in it for us? And we learned that it snows, and during the winter, they can't go walk on the school track. So in the spring and in the fall and in the summer, they go out and they walk the track. The seniors in town walk the track. That is, according to them, the real only benefit that they had from that school. And so we said then if we build a walking track in the building that is secured, separate from the kids during the school day, you'd have somewhere to walk in the wintertime. And of course they said, show me. And so we did some of those renderings that you see, and it, you know, it passed its vote. I don't know if that's the reason it did, but to your point, there has to be some benefit for the entire community, given the investment that we're looking for.
Right.
Denise?
And just a question about the building, so for a possibility of expansion in the future, because obviously we don't know what might happen 30, 40, 50 years from now. How does that fit into the ideas?
So we would plan for that. One of the questions would be if we're building of a certain size, do we figure out expansion for 25%? You know, we would work with you to figure out what that number would be, sort of looking into the future. There are consultants out there that school districts use all the time, like Planning Decisions or NEASC, who actually come in and they do sort of a population study. So if all 3 towns were built out, if you will, in 20, 25 years, what would that population of students look like? And, you know, they don't have a crystal ball, but they're basing this on historical data, if you will. And then we always plan for that. So in our plans that we would come up with, you would see, like, let's say we're building a 3-story building or a 4-story building to maximize the site, we would have a section of that where we're actually building. So for every area of 1 classroom, you get 4. You know, and that's, again, another benefit on a site like this about going vertical, if you will.
I just had a question about efficient use of space. And we talked a little bit about corridors, and how corridors are kind of wasted space in some ways, and building, and imagining buildings where you're not, it's not built along these long corridors. So I was wondering if you just talk about corridors and getting, you know, how these designs.
Sure. So I did bring just a couple of examples of our work. And so this is an example, my new pointer here. When you come out of these rooms, and think of it like this, when you come out of a classroom in the world as it is today, you enter into this corridor and you either go right or left. When you come out of a space at your house, you don't have like a corridor, right? So you come out of a room and you're in the living room, then you're in the kitchen. And so we take advantage of that. So when you come out of these spaces, you're in this much larger space. This is a student commons, this is a learning commons, these are individual smaller rooms. This is where the library keeps their books, but really this is the whole library. When you can open a school like that, the first thing it does is it gives you a very secure area right in the middle of the school. The second thing it does is it starts to use every square inch of that school. So you don't have these long corridors like you have today. You end up with spaces that are connected to spaces. And it's those connected learning spaces that really become more of a neighborhood. There's no bullying. Everybody can see everybody. Lee just talked about visual learning. So you can see everybody learning at the same time. And so that's what we mean by, if we do this right, you're not going to have a lot of rooms, if you will, lined by a corridor.
Another way of looking at this, and I think we talked about this a little earlier, was when you're in a middle school, it's all project-based learning, and you have, in the room, you have people doing projects, and then the kids spill out into what have always been the hallways, just the hallways, and they just get stepped over. You know, you're drawing a map and things like that. So we think of the hallway, well, maybe we should stop calling it a hallway. We've stopped calling it a corridor, so we've come someplace. But, you know, the idea is that think of it as a space that's just more space outside, and it opens and closes and creates alcoves and places, not just to a big space, but little places, so that we create a variety of different spaces under the stairs where kids can talk and do a project, little nooks, you know, by a window, things like that, so that if we're really successful the way that Ron is talking about this, we don't really have anything that feels like a hallway at all. And it was a leading question, but we just say hallway, no hallways, like if we can, as much as possible. That was my X through the hallway.
I got it, yeah.
So my experience going to this middle school is that it's very, very dark. And just with this open center in the middle,
Yep.
I'm just wondering how it's possible to, with the classrooms kind of lining the outside edges, still get all of the daylight into the middle. How do you approach that?
Right, so, and that's very important, and we do it through top lighting. So in this particular project here, this whole space, right, and this is a rendering, So we kind of do these renderings, and then these things are built. This is one of the schools that we've invited some folks to come look at. And what we have here is a combination of solar tubes and skylights. So not only are we bringing natural daylight into the core of the building, but we're allowing you to look up and see the sky. What you also don't see here is right where the picture is being, or the rendering is being drawn by, is a glass wall to the outside. So if we went back to your, to this concept right here, you can imagine everybody comes out of these clusters of teams, if you will, and they enter this area. So again, you have this area of space, but this whole wall that would be looking down the hill and towards the the high school rather, that could be all glass. And that could then walk out onto terraced gardens that head out towards, so your outdoor learning space could happen there too. I think natural daylighting is very important, and one of the things we try to do, especially sustainability-wise, is shut the lights off in the school during the day. And so we want to get 90% of our educational space within the daylighting zone. And that just comes into like, how do you put the building on the site? How do you take advantage of orientation? So that's a great question, because, daylighting is important.
Are there design concepts or construction techniques that are trendy right now that you just think are bad ideas?
Tons of them.
Yeah.
So let me give you an example. Everybody's seen the pictures, right? So it's like bleachers. So they build these bleachers in the middle of the school, and they think all the kids are going to sit there, and they call them things like, I guess Agora has been one of the names that have come up. So I've done my own little personal study on that. And we've gone out to these schools, and we say, how many times do students actually go and sit there? And they say, well, they'll sit there if there's a performance. No question about it. So if you're going to use that type of space for a school assembly, or like I talked about, if there's an operable wall where all of a sudden that becomes your seating for this event, they're a great idea. If you're putting it in because you think kids are going to migrate to this wooden bench that's terraced into the building, it's just not going to happen. They're going to go sit on the nice, comfortable chairs, or the areas that Lee just spoke about, which are these little caves that get carved into underneath the landings of stairs. So they're trends, right? I think that's what you're getting at. And one of the things that...
Well, we want to be progressive, but we don't want to be stupid.
Well, yeah, and that's why I think visioning is so important. A lot of times, everybody, and architects are very much as guilty as anybody else, they sort of open up these magazines and they kind of say, I need one of those, two of these, one of them, this would be great. And you really don't think about, okay, well, if you had all of these nice things in the magazine, what is it actually doing for you? Because if you don't change the way you're teaching, and you're not changing the way the students are actually learning and engaging in their curriculum, that space may not work for them. Until the 1970s, they had all these open plans, which, by the way, were great if you weren't doing a lecture-learn pedagogy. But you were. And so everybody was talking over everybody else, and so they said it was a colossal failure. But you know what? If it was project-based learning and all the teachers were coaching the kids and just having one-on-one conversations and moving around a space like that, it would have been phenomenal and it would have worked. It was just, to your point about being innovative, it was way too far ahead of its time. So we're trying to get a balance, and we call them lessons learned. We try to look at all of the things that other folks have done and that we've done, and we learn from them. We say, geez, we should do this a little bit differently next time.
Yeah. We've talked a lot about energy and moving towards net zero, or even you said net positive. What about mitigating the energy consumption during construction? Construction is incredibly energy intensive and greenhouse gas intensive.
Mm-hmm. So we'll work very closely with Andre. There's recycling programs so that you basically separate your waste. Most centers now, transfer stations and so forth, they will separate all of that stuff. We want to make sure we don't use any gas-fired cutting tools once the building envelope is up. So anything that goes on there, you don't get that sort of off-gassing inside the building if you're sawing something. after the envelope is up. So there's lots of different techniques that we use to keep the environment clean, even during construction. But really, it's a waste management program that we can look into.
The new regulations on capturing silica dust, if you're cutting concrete or cement-based materials. But for the most part, there's a balance. We've done LEED projects, and sometimes it's a great idea to, we did a project in Concord where we took down a forest and turned it into posts for the building. We turned it into, siding, into wainscoting for the building. That was great. But then they were trying for gold certification, so all of a sudden, as we were searching for those last few points, we were looking at driving 500 miles to get something from an organic source, and how much gas was wasted getting that back to the site. So, we try to work with these type of things, but use common sense on what makes sense. But in, concrete, there's additives that you use that, like fly ash, for instance, that is much greener than some of the other products that they use. So, we're aware of those and try to incorporate those type of things in the construction as much as we can.
Patty?
Sorry, speaking of sustainability, I'm all for daylight and big windows, but I know that it's a big concern that windows aren't very well insulated. Like triple pane glass can help that issue, but heating gets really, really not sustainable. How do you work that out?
You asked me what students come up with for question. That's a great question. So we use solar shades. We do use triple pane glass. Orienting the building is very important because that amount of glass, if it's on the south side of the building, you can get passive solar heating, and then use the solar shades at night to pull those shades down. All sorts of different things that we can take a look at. What you really want to do is balance the daylighting that you're getting and the energy efficiency. And one way to do that on most of these buildings, that we do anyway, is to limit the glass on the building to 25% of the exterior building envelope. So what that means is strategic use of glass. So if you're able to get all of the daylighting into all of the learning spaces, but you're also keeping, and we don't make this stuff up. Anybody here at the New Building Institute out of California? They've been studying buildings for 30 years, and they've come out with all of these sort of, they're not prescriptive measures, but they're prescriptive measures. If you reduce your window, what's called a window wall ratio, to less than 30%, and if you insulate a building a certain way, and if you have natural daylighting a certain way, they basically guarantee your 30 to 40% energy savings right off the top. And so the trick then is to take those attributes that go into any building that anybody would build, and now how does that play into a school? Because schools are very different. So to your point, absolutely, different types of glass, different types of orientation, solar shades, which are shades like this that you just literally pull down at night to keep the heat in. Great questions.
I just have a couple that I think we're going to have to probably wrap it up. It seems to me like when you're talking about going off-site, there's an assumption that we would get approval of the voters for say it's $1 million to buy the land. That we, the assumption, even it's a year longer, assuming that we get approval from the voters to buy that land, say in March, we put it. If we wouldn't get that, we'd be really kind of,
Be in trouble.
be in trouble. I mean, we'd be in no man's land,
Right.
So I mean, I think that so that assumption is that if we go that direction, even you delay it a year, but it'd be even longer because you're assuming if you don't get that approval in March. I'm not saying that very carefully, but it seems to me that the assumption is it's a year longer, assuming you get that approval in March. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. And just to follow up, it seems to me as a board, for you to move forward, you have to know which site. Is it on-site or is it off-site? And that's a decision we're going to have to make. I think as a board, whether we have enough, we're not, obviously not going to make a decision tonight, but whether we could make that a decision question for the next meeting, or whether we need, whether there's more information we need. But I think we need to move to that, because it seems to me you're kind of like stuck until you get a sense of which site it is. Is that correct?
That was our closing homework assignment for you.
So, but I also am hearing that we have to even, I mean, we could decide, for example, that we want to stay with our current site, but again, then find out that we have all these issues possibly with that site. So I'm wondering, do we need to have that information before we can make a
So
decision?
Denise, one of the things that Ron set me to do early is to contract with the site surveyor and the people-
Geotech.
Geotech
Engineer.
people who do the boring. So that's actually happening. Those contracts are signed, and we'll have that information very shortly. What do you think, Ron, and turn around for the...
Couple weeks, today's the 10th.
So-
We can contact John Turner Consulting tomorrow and ask them when they can get out here and do it.
Yeah.
Is it possible we could have that in 2 weeks?
Do you think we could have it by the next board meeting?
I'm going to say 50/50, but maybe.
Okay.
But let's...
Possible.
Yeah, it's possible, absolutely.
I think that will help inform the board that they'd be more comfortable that the site is capable of handling the new building, or what obstacles you see, and can you overcome them or not?
Sure, sure. Are you, if you have a close relationship with the town, if they have a backhoe and they wanted to dig some test pits, that would be the quickest way to get it done. So if your DPW, for instance, came out and dug a 6-foot test pit, and somebody from Bowen was here and somebody from the geotechnical engineer's office were here, they would quickly be able to say, okay, well, if we're going down with a certain type of foundation, we know we're not hitting certain types of materials. They can look and they can see what's in the ground.
In addition to doing geotech, is that what you're suggesting, Ron?
Yep, so the first thing would be test pits, and then the second thing after that would be borings. And the borings are going to give you more information to actually use that criteria to design the foundations, but the test pit right away would say, what do we have between grade and 6 feet down?
I will make that call tomorrow.
Yep, and we can do that in just a couple of different spaces on the site.
I think one of my big concerns, and probably one of the big concerns of the board overall, is earning that voter approval for whatever it is we decide is the right path. You know, I think you've probably seen there's been extensive study, and our facility committee spent a lot of time examining options, number one being the current building. One of the things I worry about is that those of us who have been involved in this, lose sight of the greater community's perhaps lack of deep understanding of why we're doing this in the first place. And I think there's a reasonable assumption that, you know, the current building has value, and I worry about coming off in such a way that it makes the general public, especially those without kids in the school, feel as though the board, the school district just wants a new building, just wants the, you know, the shiny, you know, new learning environment, when the old one, you know, many of them went there, their kids went there, that kind of thing. Based on what you've seen that we've done and documented and communicated out so far, how do you think we make a succinct but really strong, informed case to that portion of the community that says, we've really done our due diligence, the current facility is not worth investing in, and frankly, every year that goes on, we are sort of spending, you know, good money after bad. This is not a sustainable infrastructure that we should be even maintaining to the lowest minimum standards.
So I would suggest three things. The first one is a cost analysis of what it costs you to operate this facility right now. So what that means is to figure out, like basically take 2 years of electric bills, 2 years of natural gas or propane, whatever fuel that you have, or oil. Write that down, because that's your operational costs for this building per square foot. And I would do it per square foot of educational space. And so that has a value to it. And And then what you want to do is take some of our newer schools, or even schools that other architects have done, which are very energy efficient, and compare that to this is what they cost per square foot. And explain just very simply in that one little, the cost of doing nothing is what we call it. Explain in that one little pamphlet that says, this is what it costs us to operate, this is what it could cost us to operate. In order to get to here, we need roofing, we need basically an envelope that allows us to thermally do this. We need new equipment that allows us to mechanically do this. The next thing is to, and that's first thing, the second thing is to put a quick video together of literally somebody walking around the school and have the students and the teachers
We have
explain.
that. We have it.
You have that, so I haven't seen that.
It's good, it's good.
Okay, and so,
There's
that's.
that man in the back.
YouTube would be great. So the third, so have you had any community meetings where you lay out some of these options that Andre has put together for us? Where
haven't done that. That's
we
good.
take a look at this kind of information, and we actually listen to folks, and we talk to folks, and we have that meeting at the middle school, so that this meeting ties into a tour, a personal tour of the middle school. The other thing I would recommend is personal invitations get sent out, meaning you send every household in the 3 towns an invitation for something like this. And you literally invite them personally to come to this meeting and talk about, this is what we spend today. If we had a new facility, this is what it would be. And we've looked at additions and renovations. And the result is we could get something very similar, if you will, to the operational cost per square foot. But we're going to end up with more square footage, so the cost just goes up that much more. And our investment is a lot more, almost $5 million more. So that means, what's the return on investment? So it's going to pay for itself how many more years into the future? So I don't think you'll change anybody's mind who just doesn't think who doesn't think you should do anything. But you may be able to work with some folks who just don't realize, what this building shape is in and what it means financially to the school district over the next 30 years.
And the lost educational opportunities that you have going on right now, because you don't have the kind of facility that meets the needs of, we're learning in the fire service, which is my hobby, but we're learning how we're failing to relate to new generations of people coming into the service. And students are the same way. How we learn is very different from how they learn. And teachers have had to adapt to this new mythology, but if you don't give them a facility to operate in that as good as they could, we're failing the kids, what we're doing. And that's part of, we have to show them what we could do better for our next generation. And I think that's going to be part of the message of the programs that we put forth to the folks.
Okay.
So I guess I'm hearing that there's actually a lot going on without having to limit our choices about where the school goes at this point. In fact, I'd be really interested in hearing kind of what the non-negotiables that fall out of the workshop next week are before we go and start taking the options off the table.
Okay.
And when I hear, hey, we're going to go get a bunch of input, there's not actually a lot of design work that is site-specific going on between now and the end of the year, is my impression from what I'm hearing tonight.
Well, there is, actually. So when we do because we're going to continue this dialogue of making sure we get the vision correct, I think when you go in front of the taxpayers in March of 2019, you're going to want to be able to say, we're asking you for a certain amount of money to fund some design and engineering and pre-construction services in order to get us to to get a guaranteed maximum price to go on the March 2020 vote. And I think we are going to want to have a concept design at that point to tell everybody, this is the site we're using, this is the size of the building, like we're talking about 136,600 square feet. It might be a bit bigger, might be a bit smaller as we're going through this visioning. But when you ask for those monies in 2019, I think people are going to want to know, what are we talking about? Are we talking about a $46 million project or a $51 million project? And is it on the existing site or is it not on the existing site? So we've done this a lot where, we find that that's what the voters really want to know to be an informed voter is what's this, chunk of money going towards in order to get a guaranteed maximum price. That's their only shot, right, between March of 2019 and March of 2020 to really take a look at what are they funding before we get to that vote in 2020. It's just a thought. It's just,
Okay, well, thank you so much. Very
thank you.
informative, a
We
great,
appreciate it.
great launch. Thank you very much.
Glad to be part of the team.